Communitarianism is a philosophy that emphasizes the connection between the individual and the community. Although the community might be a family unit, communitarianism usually is understood, in the wider, philosophical sense, as a collection of interactions among a community of people in a given place, or among a community who share an interest or who share a history. Communitarian philosophy is based upon the belief that a person's social identity and personality are largely molded by community relationships, with a smaller degree of development being placed on individualism. Terminology. The philosophy of communitarianism originated in the 20th century, but the term communitarian was coined in 1841 by John Goodwin Barmby, a leader of the British Chartist movement, who used it in referring to utopian socialists and other idealists who experimented with communal styles of life. However, it was not until the 1980s that the term communitarianism gained currency through association with the work of a small group of political philosophers, mostly American. Their application of the label communitarian was controversial, even among communitarians, because, in the West, the term communitarian evokes associations with the ideologies of socialism and collectivism, so public leaders, and some of the academics who champion this school of thought, usually avoid the term communitarian, while still advocating and advancing the ideas of communitarianism. The term is primarily used in two senses. Philosophical communitarianism considers classical liberalism to be ontologically and epistemologically incoherent, and opposes it on those grounds. Unlike classical liberalism, which construes communities as originating from the voluntary acts of pre-community individuals, it emphasizes the role of the community in defining and shaping individuals. Communitarians believe that the value of community is not sufficiently recognized in liberal theories of justice. Ideological communitarianism is characterized as a radical centrist ideology that is sometimes marked by leftism on economic issues and centrism on social issues. This usage was coined recently. When the term is capitalized, it usually refers to the response of communitarian movement of Amitai Etzioni and other philosophers. Origins. While the term communitarian was coined only in the mid-19th century, ideas that are communitarian in nature appear much earlier. They are found in some classical socialist doctrine, and further back in the New Testament. Communitarianism has been traced back to early monasticism, but in the 20th century began to be formulated as a philosophy by Dorothy Day and the Catholic worker movement. In an early article, the Catholic worker clarified the dogma of the mystical body of Christ as the basis for the movement's communitarianism. Communitarianism is also related to the personalist philosophy of Emmanuel Mounier. A number of early sociologists had strongly communitarian elements in their work, such as Ferdinand Tönnies in his comparison of Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft, and Emil Durkheim's concerns about the integrating role of social values and the relations between the individual and society. Both authors warned of the dangers of anomie and alienation in modern societies composed of atomized individuals who had gained their liberty but lost their social moorings. Modern sociologists saw the rise of a mass society and the decline of communal bonds and respect for traditional values and authority in the United States as of the 1960s. Among those who raised these issues were Robert Nisbet, Robert Bellah, and Alan Ehrenholt. In his book Bowling Alone, Robert Putnam documented the decline of social capital, and stressed the importance of bridging social capital, in which bonds of connectedness are formed across diverse social groups. Responding to criticism that the term community is too vague or cannot be defined, Amitai Etzioni, one of the leaders of the American communitarian movement, pointed out that communities can be defined with reasonable precision as having two characteristics. First, a web of effect-laden relationships among a group of individuals, relationships that often crisscross and reinforce one another, and second, a measure of commitment to a set of shared values, norms, and meanings, and a shared history and identity, in short, a particular culture. Further, author David E. Pearson argued that to earn the appellation community, it seems to me, groups must be able to exert moral suasion and extract a measure of compliance from their members. That is, communities are necessarily, indeed, by definition, coercive as well as moral, threatening their members with the stick of sanctions if they stray, offering them the carrot of certainty and stability if they don't. What is specifically meant by community, in the context of communitarianism, can vary greatly between authors and time periods. Historically, communities have been small and localized. However, as the reach of economic and technological forces extended, more expansive communities became necessary in order to provide effective normative and political guidance to these forces, prompting the rise of national communities in Europe in the 17th century. Since the late 20th century, there has been some growing recognition that the scope of even these communities is too limited, as many challenges that people now face, such as the threat of nuclear war and that of global environmental degradation and economic crises, cannot be handled on a national basis. This has led to the quest for more encompassing communities, such as the European Union. Whether truly supranational communities can be developed is far from clear. More modern communities can take many different forms, but are often limited in scope and reach. For example, members of one residential community are often also members of other communities, such as work, ethnic, or religious ones. As a result, modern community members have multiple sources of attachments, and if one threatens to become overwhelming, individuals will often pull back and turn to another community for their attachments. Communitarian philosophy. Communitarianism in philosophy, like other schools of thought in contemporary political philosophy, can be defined by its response to John Rawls' A Theory of Justice. Communitarians criticize the image Rawls presents of humans as atomistic individuals, and stress that individuals who are well integrated into communities are better able to reason and act in responsible ways than isolated individuals, but add that if social pressure to conform rises to high levels, it will undermine the individual self. Communitarians uphold the importance of the social realm, and communities in particular, though they differ in the extent to which their conceptions are attentive to liberty and individual rights. Even with these general similarities, communitarians, like members of many other schools of thought, differ considerably from one another. There are several distinct schools of communitarian thought. The following authors have communitarian tendencies in the philosophical sense, but have all taken pains to distance themselves from the political ideology known as communitarianism, which is discussed further below. Alistair MacIntyre, After Virtue. Michael Sandel, Liberalism and the Limits of Justice. Charles Taylor, Sources of the Self. Michael Walzer, Spheres of Justice. Academic communitarianism. Whereas the classical liberalism of the Enlightenment can be viewed as a reaction to centuries of authoritarianism, oppressive government, overbearing communities, and rigid dogma, modern communitarianism can be considered a reaction to excessive individualism, understood as an undue emphasis on individual rights, leading people to become selfish or egocentric. The close relation between the individual and the community was discussed on a theoretical level by Michael Sandel and Charles Taylor, among other academic communitarians, in their criticisms of philosophical liberalism, especially the work of the American liberal theorist John Rawls and that of the German Enlightenment philosopher Immanuel Kant. They argued that contemporary liberalism and libertarianism presuppose an incoherent notion of the individual as existing outside and apart from society, rather than embedded within it. To the contrary, they argued, there are no generic individuals but rather only Germans or Russians. Berliners or Muscovites, or members of some other particularistic community, because individual identity is partly constructed by culture and social relations. There is no coherent way of formulating individual rights or interests in abstraction from social contexts. Thus, according to these communitarians, there is no point in attempting to found a theory of justice on principles decided behind rules veil of ignorance, because individuals cannot exist in such an abstracted state, even in principle. Academic communitarians also contend that the nature of the political community is misunderstood by liberalism, where liberal philosophers describe the polity as a neutral framework of rules within which a multiplicity of commitments to moral values can coexist. Academic communitarians argue that such a thin conception of political community was both empirically misleading and normatively dangerous. Good societies, these authors believe, rest on much more than neutral rules and procedures. They rely on a shared moral culture. Some academic communitarians argued even more strongly on behalf of such particularistic values, suggesting that these were the only kind of values which matter and that it is a philosophical error to posit any truly universal moral values. In addition to Charles Taylor and Michael Sandel, other thinkers sometimes associated with academic communitarianism include Michael Walzer, Alistair MacIntyre, Sailor Ben Habib, and Shlomo Avinari. Social capital. Beginning in the late 20th century, many authors began to observe a deterioration in the social networks of the United States. In the book Bowling Alone, Robert Putnam observed that nearly every form of civic organization has undergone drops in membership, exemplified by the fact that, while more people are bowling than in the 1950s, there are fewer bowling leagues. This results in a decline in social capital, described by Putnam as the collective value of all social networks and the inclinations that arise from these networks to do things for each other. According to Putnam and his followers, social capital is a key component to building and maintaining democracy. Communitarians seek to bolster social capital and the institutions of civil society. The responsive communitarian platform described it thus: many social goals require partnership between public and private groups. Though government should not seek to replace local communities, it may need to empower them by strategies of support, including revenue sharing and technical assistance. There is a great need for study and experimentation with creative use of the structures of civil society, and public-private cooperation, especially where the delivery of health, educational and social services are concerned. Positive rights. Important to some supporters of communitarian philosophy is the concept of positive rights, which are rights or guarantees to certain things. These may include state-subsidized education, state-subsidized housing, a safe and clean environment, universal healthcare, and even the right to a job with the concomitant obligation of the government or individuals to provide one. To this end, communitarians generally support social security programs, public works programs, and laws limiting such things as pollution. A common objection is that, by providing such rights, communitarians violate the negative rights of the citizens, rights to not have something done for you. For example, taxation to pay for such programs as described above dispossesses individuals of property. Proponents of positive rights, by attributing the protection of negative rights to the society rather than the government, respond that individuals would not have any rights in the absence of societies, a central tenet of communitarianism, and thus have a personal responsibility to give something back to it. Some have viewed this as a negation of natural rights. However, what is or is not a natural right is a source of contention in modern politics, as well as historically. For example, whether or not universal health care, private property or protection from polluters can be considered a birthright. Alternatively, some agree that negative rights may be violated by a government action, but argue that it is justifiable if the positive rights protected outweigh the negative rights lost. In the same vein, supporters of positive rights further argue that negative rights are irrelevant in their absence. Moreover, some communitarians experience this less as a case of being used for others' ends and more as a way of contributing to the purposes of a community I regard as my own. Still other communitarians question the very idea of natural rights and their place in a properly functioning community. They claim that instead, claims of rights and entitlements creates a society unable to form cultural institutions and grounded social norms based on shared values. Rather, the liberalist claim to individual rights leads to a morality centered on individual emotivism, as ethical issues can no longer be solved by working through common understandings of the good. The worry here is that not only is society individualized, but so are moral claims. Comparison to other political philosophies, communitarianism cannot be classified as being wholly left or right, and many theorists claim to represent a sort of radical center. Progressives in the American sense or social democrats in the European sense generally share the communitarian position on issues relating to the economy, such as the need for environmental protection and public education, but not on cultural issues. Communitarians and moderates or moderate conservatives generally loosely align on cultural issues, such as support for character education programs. But communitarians do not support capitalism generally embraced by American conservatives. For the communitarian, leftist ideology fails to understand the importance of local tradition, identity, and core cultural values that define different communities by taking power away from such local communities and handing it to centralized, bureaucratic structures which lack the sensitivity to understand such values and local issues which may thereby arise. Furthermore, the focus of the welfare state on individual rights and entitlements has also eroded many of the traditional family bonds that united people as well as responsibilities to the community that used to exist. Communitarians also critique libertarians and free market capitalists for supporting an economic system that pressures communities into atomizing, thus undermining traditional ties between members of a given community such as within a family.